Hello, today I want to talk about something that I bet most musicians who have performed in the past will relate to. And it's something that can be really, really frustrating. You've been to a rehearsal, the rehearsal goes really, really well, or your practice session goes really well in preparation for a performance. And then when you do the performance itself, the performance is not good. You've made mistakes, it doesn't go as well as you planned, there are things that go wrong which you didn't anticipate, and so on. And it's really disheartening, and you feel despondent afterwards, and you think, oh well, what was the point of that? And you might be tempted to think, well, it was all a disaster, I'm terrible, I'm a terrible musician, I need to go and practice more, or whatever it might be. But it's really important to understand that actually mistakes happen in all sorts of industries, to the best people. Doesn't matter whether you're a professional pilot, they make mistakes. You might be a cyclist, a professional cyclist, or a driver, or even people just walking down the road can make mistakes and be distracted. So it's really important to be able to understand our mistakes. And it's also really important to understand the types of mistakes that we make, because actually not all mistakes are the same. Clearly, as a musician, it might be the mistakes that you make might be fluffing a note, misfretting, or it might be in a performance forgetting where you are and losing your way, or it might be playing the wrong section or even playing in the wrong key. It all depends. There's lots of different types of mistakes. However, and there's lots of different causes, but actually it's possible to make those mistakes fit three different categories, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute. But it's really important, if we just go back to that sort of idea where, people in other industries who make mistakes, if you were working in a safety critical industry, like aviation, for example, which is my background, if you made a mistake, there's a good chance that there would be some kind of investigation into that mistake and the causes behind it. And the reason for that is not to create blame, is actually to create a process of learning whereby people can learn from their mistakes and share the information, and hopefully that mistake is not made again, or things can be made safer, or procedures can be changed, and so on. So actually learning from your mistakes is a really important and crucial thing to do in any professional industry. But there's one really key thing about that, and being able to do that, is you have to be honest. You have to be open and honest about why the mistakes happened. Now, that's something that a lot of people find really, really hard. It's very difficult to admit that you got something wrong, or that you messed up. That's quite hard for people to do, especially because we're taught at school, as we grow up and go through school, we're taught that, if we get things wrong, then we get downgraded. We don't get full marks. We don't pass exams if we're wrong, if we make mistakes. So it's very difficult for us to kind of overcome those hurdles sometimes and actually be properly honest about why mistakes happen. But it's a really important thing. And as I say, if it was, say, another industry, actually you'd have to be quite open and honest, accept some kind of investigation and learn from it. Now, clearly we're musicians. Hey, this should be fun. This is a hobby. You don't have to open an investigation into why you made a mistake. But the point I'm making is it's really useful to think about the mistakes. Now, so that's a key point, is you've got to be honest. And if you think about it, for musicians, there will be three types of mistakes, generally speaking, or three categories of mistakes. And understanding these is really crucial and really important and really helpful to learning and improving your practice routine and helping to improve your performance in the future. So the first type of mistake that I want to mention is what we would call error. Now, error might be you might just be thinking, well, hang on, isn't error just another name for mistake? Actually, there's a proper definition of error. And the best way to think of it is, an error is when the wrong procedure has been followed or the wrong information has been followed. So somebody may have done something correctly, but used the wrong information. So in music, this is quite a crucial thing, because if you follow the wrong music, you might play it correctly, but if it's the wrong music for that performance, a different arrangement or a different version, for example, then you're going to be making a mistake. You're not going to be playing the right thing. Now, that's a bit of a basic example, but actually going into a bit more detail, what if you have learned the wrong technique or poor technique in the first place? You've made an error. So it's really important to be able to understand what your errors are, and they're really crucial in those early stages of learning. Whether it's, you might be a more sort of advanced player, but if you're learning a new piece of music, this is why it's really important to go very slowly. Make sure that you're learning the correct music, the correct technique for that music in the first place. It's very difficult to unlearn something if you've got it wrong. So learn the right thing right from the very outset and don't make any errors. So that's the first category of mistake, is error. The next one that I want to talk about, now forgive me, this is kind of my military background coming out, but I call this a training deficiency. So training, practice, rehearsal, whatever you want to call it, but whatever you call the time that you spend preparing for a performance, and normally a lot of musicians would call that practice. Strictly speaking, I think practice is what you do when you have already learned something and you keep it fresh and you stop yourself going stale and you stop your skills fading. That's practice. Actually, until you've actually got to the stage where you can do it, everything leading up to that, I would call that training or learning. But anyway, I'm getting pedantic. Training deficiencies. So this is where you have not put in enough time learning the piece of music. So you've not properly remembered it. You've not developed the motor skills, if you like, to play that piece of music automatically. You're still having to think about where your fingers go. If you're at that stage and you go into a performance, you're probably going to be prone to making a mistake because your brain is still thinking mechanically about how to actually play the music. Ideally, in a performance, you need to be way beyond that. Your fingers, if you're playing the guitar, need to be able to almost play the music automatically without thinking, and you need your creative mind free to think about expression and dynamics and timing and responding to the other musicians or the audience or whatever it might be. Okay, so training deficiency. You've not spent enough time with the music, you've not spent enough time learning the fingering and the positions and so on. That's going to come down to just, do you have enough time in the day? If you're an amateur musician like me, it's about finding the time outside of all the other commitments that you might have. Or I guess if you're a professional musician, it might be finding the time as well outside of commitments. You've got gigs, rehearsals, performances, studio work, whatever it is that you're doing. Actually finding the time to practice, especially new pieces of music, it can be quite challenging. So at other times, it's also about self-discipline as well. It may be, and this is something I've definitely fallen foul of this in the past, you've been taught the correct techniques in the first place by a teacher or off a training course, but actually then in your own time when no one's watching you, do you have the self-discipline to apply the correct techniques? And for me, I'm sure it's the same for many others, it's about going slowly with the music in the first place, learning it correctly, taking your time and then slowly building up. My problem is I'm too impatient. I want to start playing it quicker and up to speed. And then I make mistakes in my practice. And then what do? Do I slow down and correct those mistakes properly? Or do I just try and gloss over them and hope that it's all going to work out for the best? That's not the best technique. Go slowly. So training deficiency, not spending enough time, not applying the right techniques, not having the self-discipline to do what needs to be done. And then the third mistake category is one that's really difficult to handle. This is one that anyone who's performed in any discipline, any skills-based task where you've had to perform, this is where you're going to, you can't foresee these. And these are distractions. So distractions could be caused by nervousness. They could be caused by your own physiological state, whether you're tired, whether you're hungry, whether you're thirsty, and so on. So they may be distractions. Obviously, nervousness is creating, a body response, flight and fight, and all those sorts of things, and actually your body is in some kind of response mechanism that's different to what you're used to in a practice environment. So all those issues can be distractions. But then also at a performance, you might find the audience is distracting. If you're not used to performing, if it's perhaps the first few gigs that you've done, you can find that the audience is distracting. I mean, I've been in this situation where someone is, giving cheering you on and saying, hey, great, well done, clapping, and you acknowledge it, and actually you then miss your finger positions and so on, and mess up. So the audience can be distracting, and then there's all manner of other things as well. Of course, there are the distractions of equipment and kit. You might be using kit that's not yours, or you might have a buzzing cable lead, pedal board or whatever that's playing up. All those distractions can start playing on your mind. And what's then even worse is these can be compound issues as well. So you might be nervous, there might be the distraction of someone in the audience, and you might then also have a bit of gear that's a distraction as well. So all these issues are they may seem like they're quite difficult to overcome, but actually there are a few things that you can do. So when it comes to equipment and gear and all those sorts of things, think about all the things that could go wrong. Generally speaking, it's things not working, cables not working, microphones not working, dodgy pickup selectors on guitars or whatever it might be. So make sure that all of your gear and your equipment and your instruments are all kept in good condition, and make sure they're set up correctly and properly by a professional service, I would recommend, unless you're particularly good at doing that sort of stuff yourself. And also then take spare gear. Everyone likes to joke about the amount of gear that guitarists take to gigs, but for me, there's a reason why I take a couple of guitars, an amp or two possibly, and then boxes and bags of cables and all those sorts of things. Is I want to make sure that I've got contingencies in case I have some kind of problem, in case something's not working. And then the other thing that I would highly recommend as well is try and make your unknown variables known. Now, that means if you're not used to the venue, if it's a venue that you've not been to before, especially if if this is one of your early gigs, try and go to the venue beforehand if you can. Either get there nice and early, or perhaps go on another day, or perhaps go to a gig beforehand, someone else's gig at the same venue, and get a feel for the layout. Find out where you're going to park, where you're going to unload. Try and meet key people if you can. So if at the venue there's a sound engineer, lighting engineer, stage manager, whatever it might be, if those people are there and you can meet them, introduce yourself, chat to them, and perhaps find out what they might want you to do on the day. And that way you're making sure that all those unknown things become known, because actually a lot of nervousness is about fear of the unknown, isn't it? Okay, so that's a really sort of key area that you can work on. Okay, so that's about it. I do have an information sheet about all this that summarises all those aspects. That's on my website. I'll put the link below in the comments. But really, just to conclude, everyone makes mistakes. It's one of those things. It happens to the best of us. When I used to be in the military, I used to be working in aviation, and aviation is a safety critical thing. High standards are expected, very professional people, but even the best people made mistakes. So it's one of those things that in my industry I got very used to, and mistake and error analysis was part and parcel of the job, because it presented an opportunity for learning. So they do happen. Embrace them, learn from them. And then the other thing to bear in mind as well, of course, actually sometimes mistakes lead to happy accidents. So you never know, your mistakes might be something that lead on to something more positive in the future. Okay, that's it. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope that's useful. Put some comments below. I'd love to hear what you've got to say. And it might be that you can think of other types of mistakes or other categories. Share them. It's a conversation. I'd love to hear them. Okay, thanks. See you next time.